All right. Well, no intro necessary. US Arc, same as always. You guys don't get the thumbnail, but always support. Ben will tell you the importance of US Arc being a Florida guy. Always aware of every situation, but I hate intros, so we're going to get this rolling. Ben Cole, buddy, thank you for making time for this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm
That's,
still waiting on some redfoot tortoises to show up tonight. So,
okay. Well, we can cut it a little short for Redfoots if necessary.
yeah.
But no, yeah, I always like to butter people up a little bit, but I've wanted to do this for a long time.
Yep.
You know, always enjoy the conversations when I see you at the shows. So I don't think this will suck. Yeah, nonetheless, man. So give me a little bit of a timeline on your like early stages in the hobby, because I know you went to school. Or was it Florida State? Did you go to school?
No, University of Maine.
University of Maine. Okay, yes, I should have known that. But you worked at University or Florida
Yeah,
State.
that's how I ended up in Florida. Was the University of Florida recruited me out of a lab in Massachusetts in 2001.
Okay, cool. So it's all coming back to me now because I got on the hobby just after you got down to Florida. But well, what was it like in Maine, especially being a reptile guy? Because I know there's a lot of regulations up there. Were you able to do a whole lot in your younger days?
Yeah, well, Maine was a white list state, so that's a state that has a list of animals you can have. Everything else, even if it's a subspecies, is banned. There is a permit application process. However, back then, it was basically well known that Fish and Game would gladly let you apply because they wanted their permit fee, application fee, and then that you would just never, ever hear from them again.
Fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, early days, I grew up on a horse farm, had all the regular cats, dog pets that normal people have. But I was an avid fisherman and hunter, so I was in the woods, for several months of the year, almost every day. So I saw a lot of newts, red afts, spotted salamanders, a lot of pond turtles. And, I was just interested in all animals. And I thought I was going to go to vet school and become a vet. So when I first went to college to get my undergrad degree, I went for Bachelor of Science in pre-vet medicine. And when I went to college, I suddenly had no animals. And, I came from a little tiny town of around 200 people. So going to school, suddenly being surrounded by people, but no animals, I kind of didn't know what to do. So I got into the aquarium hobby first, started collecting driftwood to trade to the pet shop to buy all the saltwater fish I could never afford. And on an invoice they couldn't pay me for, they traded me some cow kings and some gray banded kings. And just from them being put together temporarily to live together while I got enough equipment, the gray bandeds laid eggs. And I incubated them successfully first go, made some money on the clutch, and it kind of put the idea together that, hey, these things don't eat a lot of mice, and I get a lot of money for the babies. So, that's kind of how it started in college was, monetization right off the get-go. And so it allowed me to look around and see a whole world of exotic animals that I never thought possible. And it kind of shifted away, my idea from being a large animal vet to I wanted to be either, an exotic vet or research or, something different than cows and horses, which I had thought was going to be my life.
It's cool. So did you do anything special with the gray banded eggs? Any special substrate? It was the early 2000s, so it's not like you were clumping up paper towels and getting them wet or newspaper. Like at that point, you knew what you were doing with them?
Well, no. So, I mean, being scientifically minded, being biologically minded, already I knew that we were going to have to do some stuff. So I quickly started calling around people. And one of the first people I met in the hobby was a guy by the name of Doug Kranick. He's still around. He's a high school science teacher, at actually the town where my dad grew up. And so I connected with him on the phone, talked to him a bit, got some parameters on incubation. I already had a GQF catalog. They're a game and quail bird company out of Georgia that also sells a whole lot of incubators. So I ordered myself a handy dandy Hovabator that, styrofoam with just a, wafer rheostat, and incubated them pretty easy.
Yeah, tight, man. So, being in Florida, we're going to jump forward and we're going to jump back, but working with a larger company, I always talk about it. I transitioned from 3-bedroom little house I rented with small bedrooms. One room was completely devoted to skinks and some colubrids. The other room had a couple boa racks in it and a couple baby racks. And then when Ben passed away, it was 2,500 square feet, 2,000 to 3,000 animals. Just jump in and kind of work with it. When you went from kind of doing your thing to helping out with some of these larger companies, were you already pretty big yourself, or were you kind of just a small collector that started managing something bigger?
Yeah, so in college, I went from 4 snakes to 50 snakes to 500 snakes pretty quick because by sophomore year, I joined a fraternity. My fraternity had a big 40-room house, but they had a big purge, so we had a lot of empty bedrooms. So I rented a second bedroom and basement. And, so by the time I graduated, and then I hung around in town for a year waiting for my then girlfriend to graduate. I had 500 animals when UF called and said, hey, let's come to Florida. And so I moved here with 500 animals. I already had, some stuff I had bought in Pennsylvania. I had a venomoid monocle. So I quickly, got into an apprenticeship here, get my venomous license. And then, I basically just kind of grew up to about 1,000 animals in 2010 when I finally left UF and said, hey, I can make more doing this than ever working for a research university. And then, but from 2003 to 2010, while I was working at UF, I was also moonlighting at Eugene Bissette's, and was learning volume mass production there. Then 2010, I worked for Amir Soleimani for a couple of years. And then in 2013, I went to Gourmet Rodent and worked there from 13 to 19. And then after 19, I've just been on my own, not working for anybody else.
All right. That's cool, man. So what was some of the things you learned working with Eugene, just about when we're talking large scale? Because even my seasons, I feel like I could stretch a season out year round, but there's always the heavy point. Were you guys able to manipulate, we'll just say ball pythons where you could have a steady flow year round, or were you guys a heavy season and then a little after?
So when I moved to Eugene's, a couple of things really struck me right off the bat was how much he paid attention to animals and what's going on around the animals. So, Eugene's facility looks like a nice farmhouse from the outside. It's all split block concrete face. But on the inside, it's really just set up as animal rooms. So it kind of takes that idea of doing it in your bedroom out and instilled the, we've got a purpose-built room that has skylights that go down the row. So the animals are going to get, photo periods. We recorded, all the different moon cycles, humidities, barometric pressures, all that stuff back in the single-digit 2000s. Gene was recording end of day, beginning of day, every day. on all the rack cards. And back then, we had, he had several dozen species of animals from, berms to all the different boas, imperator, constrictor, occidentalis, a bunch of the Mexican imperators, Sonoran deserts, then carpondros, carpets, green trees, and then a whole litany of colubrids, and then some ball pythons. And so there was something going on all the time, and throughout the year. So there was constant production every day of the year. And so Gene really taught me how to look at an animal, see what it's doing, how it's reacting to outside, whether it's rainy, dry, hot or cold, winter rainy season versus the spring, summer rainy season. And then he also taught me, cost of production. What does it really cost you to make a baby, or what does it really cost you to make an egg, and how to make decisions. For like one of the decisions that you would probably do backflips over as a hobbyist. When I was there, Gene had a small room. It's now the office. But he had about 30 green trees in it. And they were all producing well. I mean, he was, out of 30 adults, about 20, 24 of them were females. And, the majority were going every year. And, he announced that we were going to get rid of them and turn that building into corn snakes, or that room into corn snakes. So if you told a hobbyist now that you were going to get rid of producing green trees for corn snakes, they would think you're ridiculous. But when you look at cost of production versus what they're selling for, how fecund a corn snake is over a green tree, and how many years you can breed that female without replacing her, you're going to get more dollars per cubic inch out of that room.
Yeah.
And so it really turned do you want to be a business? Do you want to be a hobbyist, and what the difference is?
So I always like having that conversation, because I feel like, people look at being a breeder as like a dirty thing sometimes, especially when you start talking about like what we're talking about, like what goes into a species that maybe it's not worth actually working with. Maybe it's more of a hobby. That green tree pythons, I'm sure, were still very profitable back then. But they're not nearly as what they are now with the designer morphs. So were they pretty expensive back then too?
When he was producing them, we were getting about $300 a baby, which was about twice what the imports were, coming in through Bushmaster.
All right. What was your average clutch back then?
Yeah, 16 to 18.
Okay, that's respectable, man. So, talking about this, and I hate saying it out loud because all I'm doing is kind of teaching a good idea to somebody, but I said that with like palmetto corn snakes. I held back 10 females with the intention of breeding all 10 females to visual males. That rack space is taken up essentially what the floor space of a 32 quart tub would be. And if that rack system could give me an average of 10 eggs per female a year, and I don't double clutch them, if I go full retail, that's a $25,000 rack system. Yes, it's kind of boring just making the same thing over again, but like the colubrids, like you said, are just so easy and definitely maybe not as overlooked as it used to be. I feel like colubrids kind of go in waves, and then it goes in waves based on certain colubrids or certain projects. I like the colubrid thing. That's actually probably the one thing I've expanded on the most last 3 or 4 years because of what goes into it compared to what you can get out of it.
Oh, I had trouble hearing that.
That's fine. Half the shit I say is la 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 la, so I wouldn't think much of that. You got to unmute yourself. Hit the mute button. Good.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
I was trying to switch it from headset to speaker.
No, you're okay. I do the same shit, man. But so back when you were doing the college thing and you got up to 1,000 animals, were those mainly colubrids back then also, or were you a little bit of everything?
Well, so when I first moved to Florida, I was, 500 colubrids. And I had also started picking weird boas out of, you know, uh, different shows. I'd find them, imports from Ben Siegel, the infamous Sean Fay before his debacle was found out. And I had picked all these weird boas from shops. So I started building a boa collection. So I had almost 100 boas before I realized that it's just too infrequent. It was too frequent to get bad babies. I got really good clutch numbers, but I got poor saleability by the time it was all said and done. And, then I started growing ball pythons in '04. So by 2010, I had really switched out all the boas and really grown ball pythons. And ball pythons have been a steady grow until last year.
All right. And we'll get into that a little bit. But
Yeah.
okay, so boas. You said you were just kind of picking out the oddballs. Were you doing a lot of like Nicaraguan, Central American stuff? Were you getting a lot of Colombian stuff? Like, did you find anything that actually proved out to be anything?
Yeah, so I got a pair of Argentines, and first clutch from them, I pulled a T positive in '04.
Wow.
And I sold that on. When I was picking from Sean Fay in '01 and 2000 and 2001, he had several anneries came in and he sold them for $25 along with the rest, claiming they were just ugly boas. So those went out for big money. But I really was into striped Guyanas, patternless Guyanas, striped Surinams, all the stuff that is purple in the wild and then, comes in and slowly fades because a lot of it's diet related.
Really?
And then I had Honduran fire bellies too, which I started amassing a good group of those and then kind of got an offer that was too good to refuse, and I've never seen them again.
So that's a gene that's kind of coming back around right now. I remember that in the like 2006-ish, I want to say, customer turned me onto them. You saw a lot of stuff done in Europe, a lot of it put into the leopard project, but I know a garter snake guy that just got some in, and I know a couple other people I want to say have them, but I've always really enjoyed those. I think you're going to start seeing them mixed into a lot more stuff now, which could be unique. I know a lot of people complain about like hybridizing when it comes to certain things, but when you get into the morph game, even in boas, I like what Del Bono's done over the years. I like how he mixes everything just to make a nice designer pet. Don't really think twice about it, but the Argentine. Now, did you have like Reptiles by Max stock that came in and you happen to hit one, or what was the deal there?
I just got a random pair from Sean Fay on a trade.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that there's no connection to anything that happened with Reptiles by Mac, because I want to say they produced theirs and it had to be like the mid to late 90s, right?
I think so.
Right.
I think mine were probably just known hets that became lost at a shop.
All right, which is possible, of course. That's pretty
cool. Because when you have so many holdbacks of so many things, you cast stuff to the wind every once in a while, and it randomly pops up again. I think that's why we have so many ball pythons that are named different things but end up being the same.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna really miss the arguments now that there's RGI and he can kind of clear everything up for us. Like, I think I always bring it up, but like the Hurricane was a good example. Like, there were certain eyes in the hobby that just kept on saying it looked a lot like Trick, a lot like Blitz. There was a lot of arguments about it for a minute, and then we found out all three were the exact same thing.
Yep.
So that's all right, man. That's big part of the hobby. A lot of people get rich off of people not realizing what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
But so when you were also picking stuff out, I mean, you ever going down to Strictly and looking for animals?
Yeah. I mean, I had much better relationship with Ben Siegel than I did Strictly's, but I have bought a lot of stuff from them over the years. Same thing, for a little while. I was picking from Jose at Two Amigos, and going down there with Ray Pitzer quite a bit. And of course, I've bought a ton of stuff from Underground over the years.
Cool. So the chain or the bigger focus on ball pythons was just because it was just such a big part of the hobby, right? Lots of opportunity there.
Well, I mean, I genuinely liked ball pythons as a animal way back in the 90s. So as I was graduating college and I didn't know what to do, the pet store that I had been doing all my fish business with, in driftwood business, and the one that originally sold me my first 4 snakes, they went out of business, and I ended up buying them. The kid was doing all right. He just wanted to marry his girl and go off into the sunset, and so I bought the shop. And there was some big ball pythons out in the shop, and I eventually bred them. Again, no real skill, just keeping 4 or 5 of them together in a 125-gallon tank. And I made some ball pythons. So they were, one of my earliest breeding successes. So I just, again, started picking out weird ones. I got some weird blackback stuff from Burgundy. I eventually, that's how I met Amir, was I bought an albino spider in 2004, which was my first investment snake. And, it went from there. And I thought they were going to be, owning a business, seeing what people bought, even though the big fat American with a lot of tattoos, I wanted berms and rocks and retics and big stuff and monitors. But I realized that didn't pass the mom test. And owning a shop showed me that they wanted things that were easy to do, easy to feed, didn't take up 10 feet of a wall in a room. And the ball pythons were it. And, by 2004, I was really handy at breeding all the normals I had. And so that's why I made the investment on an albino spider and, just started making stuff from there. Plus, I had already been helping out at Eugene's. And, at that point, Gene had several hundred albinos and lots of Russos, several hundred Russos. And I was seeing the volume production starting to go of morphs to shops. And I just thought that, this thing is going to take off.
That's cool. I don't know why. I think I was just so obsessed with boas. Like, I couldn't see what the ball pythons were going to be, even though, like, I always paid a lot of attention to them. I remember there was a local guy in Buffalo, New York that had bought like a pastel back in like 2003, which was a really big deal back then. I think I always talk about it, and you remember these days, I was buying ball pythons out of the Buffalo newspaper. I think I was even finding them maybe even on Craigslist back then, and the local pet store was also selling me big animals that came in because it was so hard for them to sell them. And I was taking those $20 or $30 females I was buying, and I was flipping them for $400 to $500. And I remember I turned probably $60 in snakes into a $2,000 albino ball python one time, just because I traded my way up. And then inevitably I ended up trading those animals with Ben Siegel. And then I think I traded those animals for a couple boa constrictors. And then I traded those for something else that I sold. And then I went out and bought some new animals. So I probably went the long way to get what I had ever really wanted, but I essentially turned like $60 into like my first big boa project I got to work with.
Yep. I mean, that's how a ton of people that were in my circle in the single digit 2000s were, they got given an animal, they traded into an animal, they worked an animal off. They finally got a second one, and, they finally made a clutch, and they just traded their first babies for everything else they wanted, or went to a show and traded 2 babies for this new thing, and then brought that back to Maine and traded to somebody else. And man, over the years, I've traded snakes for, everything from money to boats to guns to vehicles, everything.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have a pretty good production year. So anybody in the audience listening, I'd like to get first edition Power Ranger Zords and second edition Power Ranger Zords this year. I'll trade anything for them. I'll tell you that right now. I being so poor as a kid, I got the knockoff versions of Power Ranger Zords, and like that was cool. But I'll put some time into them if I got them as an adult. I'll play with them a little bit like I would have as a kid. I think that's just the way it is now. I just want everything that I couldn't have as a kid. And retro is so cool now. Why the fuck not?
Yeah.
But so, what was the first time you got to actually travel out of country for something reptile related?
I think it was 2017. So I went to Taiwan.
Okay. Okay. What was that related to?
Just meeting shops, trying to make connections. I'd met several guys. They were more in the frog realm at Daytona, because I'd done Daytona religiously since 2002. And I finally just, I didn't realize how cheap traveling was. So previous, whenever I could travel, I went back to Maine, or I went to somewhere else in the U.S., got tattooed, or I went hunting, fishing back to Maine. And then I don't know why, but I finally realized around 2017 through a friend of mine that, yeah, you can go to these other countries for the same price I can fly somewhere else in the U.S. Round trip tickets, the same price. And so we've gone every year since 2017, most years, multiple places in Asia, until last year, which, I didn't travel last year because of the chemo.
So I didn't want to bring it up. You're in remission now, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Although
Congratulations.
I don't feel any different, so I don't know what they fixed, but supposedly.
Well, the hair's coming back nicely, so something's right now.
That grew in. And in fact, I don't know why, but my bald spot filled in. So I guess if you're bald and nothing worked, go through chemo.
Okay. I have a couple things in my body that make me uncomfortable. It could be cancer and a bald spot that's starting to thrive. So that might be the answer. I didn't think about that. I've been trying to find those like cans of like brown hairspray you put on your bald spots at the thrift store, but I haven't come across one yet. And I'm not sure they're making those anymore.
I don't know. Maybe the CFC band 10 years ago snuffed them out, but those were always a great late night TV spot.
Yeah, I never thought I would use a thing like that, but I do see the potential in a thing like that now. I talk about it a lot, but in my building, when I walk to the front of the building, I got cameras everywhere and the monitors up front. And as soon as I get to the front of the building, the monitor hits me right on the back of the bald spot and just gives me that big screen to look at. So I think about balding a lot now.
Yeah, in 2020, I was in Japan in a elevator that had you could see, because it had a display of its own camera to make sure you weren't doing any misdeeds in the elevator. And I was like, whoa, I'm really that fucking bald?
Yeah, you never forget that moment when you find out, man. I thought I was doing better than I was, but
yeah,
someday I'll give up on it, or I'll have enough money I can maybe get it back again. But I had a good run. Yeah,
I've been for a while. I was thinking about just tattooing the idea light bulb in my bald spot.
Fuck, that's a pretty good one. I was thinking about just leaning into the Jewish thing and wearing a yarmulke, but I don't know if I can get away with that anymore. It's not as cool as it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I've talked to Mike Schultz a lot just about like some stories about like Ian going to Africa and Ian go to these other countries to create these contacts and these relationships. What does it take, and is it even possible anymore to have a thing like that anymore? Or is that like a dying thing in the hobby?
I think it's a kind of a dying thing. And Facebook Messenger and different internet stuff have made just communicating like we are now so easy. And it's so much easier. You can video call, so you can see the animals, you can look through things without having to go. Because some people are afraid to travel. Some people don't want to incur that extra money. Some people just can't get away for 7 or 10 days. Because if you're going to fly to the other side of the earth, going for 2 days really is kind of hard. So I think the internet and our communication abilities have taken some of that out. And the other thing is that, historically, it seemed like your supplier and you were beholden to each other, like more than it is now. Now it's, guy will sell anything to anybody. Whereas previously it used to be, your guy in a third world country sold you everything he got and you bought it all, whether you wanted it or not, just to kind of keep, him under wraps or, some sort of beholding to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've had the talk like, the benefits and negatives that would come to the hobby if there wasn't import export or just import in general. I'm always torn, man. I would like to think that the price of everything would just stay steady or go up if we couldn't get more stuff in. But also, I don't believe that we can actually fulfill the needs of what the one is in the United States for reptiles if there aren't animals coming in still.
Yeah, and I've seen that particularly while working at Gourmet, because they were feeding a national level store, and they were, they had 77,000 breeder animals themselves, all species combined, but they still were buying, I don't know, probably close to 100,000 animals imported, all species combined. Now the thing is under a perfect world, I personally wouldn't want imports because I think captive bred is a better animal because at least it's acclimated here to our water, our food, our whatever. But as a realist, I realize that one, sending money back to those communities in those third world countries helps them protect that resource. Because if that resource is making them money, they're going to protect it. If it isn't, they're just going to cut the trees for charcoal, for lumber, for food, because they want to cultivate it in agriculture, whether it be other plant-based agriculture, palm oil, cattle, because those countries all want to become first world like us. And, we forget that, we came here and we got rid of the buffalo and we tilled up a lot of the middle of the country for wheat and corn and soy. And then we did all that stuff. We just did it 200 years ago, so we forgot about it. Tom Crutchfield famously said a long time ago, conservation through commercialization. If you give something of value, then people will protect it. And so as we stop spending money on these various things from these other countries, they're not going to utilize it anymore.
No, and I believe in that argument or that point of view. I've had that with people myself. I know there was actually some, like, I'm not even going to say it, but there were areas where that was proven where they were collecting these animals, and not a lot of them, but they were collecting these animals to pay the bills. And the moment that we got rid of it, like you said, they burnt it all down. They found another way to profit off that land that was no longer collecting animals. And I can't remember the species, but there's a million stories like that.
So, you look at a satellite map of Madagascar, half of it's brown now.
Yeah.
And it's not brown because the trees are brown. It's brown because you can see the ground.
And that's why.
There is no more canopy.
So, you being in Florida and in the community, I'm sure you've been getting wind of what this new documentary is going to be like, the continuation of Tiger King.
I am out of the hobby a little bit in that, I try not to be a lot on Facebook and following some of these things, just because it aggravates me too much. And, like I said, last year I spent a lot of time laying down. And I don't know. I just kind of pay attention to my own stuff, and so I actually haven't even heard the continuation of Tiger King.
All right. Well, we won't get into
I've
that kind
just
of
been following
conversation.
all the sloth problems.
Nope, that's fair. I know it's only on HBO. It's not a Netflix thing, and I do think it's going to really focus on importing. Just
Yeah,
like the stress that the animals put through on the way here. I'm sure there's going to be some dead pictures of animals in deli cups through
yeah,
import. So that's just kind of another thing that, man, I never know if these things are going to affect anything. And if it does affect anything, I think it will probably affect more of the import of animals and the treatment of animals. But outside of that, I don't know if there's going to be any real effects to the community.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, all the import orders I opened up, I never saw a horror show like a box with hundreds of dead animals. But the people we were using were longtime people, famous people, guys that came to Daytona. So, they had an image to uphold. But, at the end of the day, when if you're dealing with somebody in a third world country, they don't have the same values as we have. So, I mean, they want to protect the animal in the box because they want to get paid for it, but you know, they don't treat every animal as special as we do. At the end of the day, um, and so I see that, and then if stuff gets delayed, if it's got to hop through two different airports in Africa, or it's got to go Africa to Europe to some port in the U.S. to then to the end user, that box might be 4 or 5 days. It might go through a 50-degree temperature shift. And those guys over there don't have all the resources we have. Like when I've got an entire shed full of brand new boxes from Morph Market and phase change packs and packing material of 4 different types and banding straps and all that stuff. And, I've got way more than they do. I have one of my orders from Africa, which was a $50,000 all brand new morphs from Noah. I got a box and it had insulation on 3 sides of the box. So I emailed Noah and said, hey, why didn't we have insulation on the other 3 sides? And he tried to argue that they didn't have styrofoam where the boxes were shipped out of in Africa. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true or not, that if they have styrofoam.
They made it okay?
Yep.
That's it. That's good.
They were cold, but because it came in winter, but they made it all okay.
Cold's not a problem, man. I think everybody's heard the story a million times about Ralph Davis getting the first Platy Daddy in, almost frozen in the box, and I want to say within days later was willing to breed. So, I really, early on in the hobby, I could only imagine how many things were overlooked, especially with ball pythons coming in that will be lost forever. I think I even remember hearing stories that a pied ball python in an import shipment would almost be disregarded as like I don't want to. It's not a problem, but like
a
defective animal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, I mean, that, like I was saying about buying those Anery Central Americans from Sean Fay in 2000, he called them ugly boas, and he sold them for $10 less because they didn't have red tails.
Just wild. When do you think the hobby became truly wise? What was going on around them about the animals coming in? Was it like a late 90s thing, or do you think it was all early 2000s?
I think late 90s because, Joe Fossey, Tampa Reptile Exchange, he was doing it through the 80s into the 90s, and he's the one that brought in the first albino and the first genetic stripe, and, and made the Noah to, from Africa to U.S. pipeline using Noah. That was kind of, there was only a few people then, but then you kind of saw the emergence of Miami, the end of the 90s, where they were ordering everything, but then, suddenly it split into, lots of companies importing into, right around I would say the last 4 or 5 years of the 90s.
Okay. Is Joe still with us?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I sold him a bunch of animals yesterday.
All right. Awesome. Did he go to school with Noah at Florida?
No, so Noah was over here going to school at the University of South Florida, and Joe used to chase a girl over there, and he used to travel around to all the different universities and just put notices on message boards of what was coming in. And he saw Noah trying to sell some handicrafts from Africa on the student union, and he struck up a conversation with him, and they actually started importing um, Congo parrots at the time, African grays.
Yeah.
And that's why Noah's company was called Gray-Headed Enterprises, because that's what they were shipping in the beginning. And then it just kind of was like, oh, can you do reptiles too? And it first started with venomous reptiles, and they were selling them to the different milking facilities, Haast and Van Horn. And then it turned into more pet stuff after that.
That's really cool. So I don't know how I got turned on to Joe, but I got his contact years ago, and this was back when I was doing the Herp House Rock podcast. And I gave him a call one day, and I expressed interest on like me, him, and Noah just sitting down. He told me about some of the early days with Noah, just like getting all things rolling for ball pythons. Now I do know that Noah did pass away a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But I me, man. I love the old stories. I love the origin stories of all these different mutations, the things that went right, the things that went wrong. A little bummed out I never got a chance to talk to Noah.
Yeah. He invited me to come over to Africa because he wanted me to bring an ultrasound and teach him how to ultrasound. But, that was probably 2015, 2016. I hadn't internationally traveled yet. And I was a little bit scared of being the big fat white guy going to Africa. I just didn't. And now that's one of my biggest regrets is I didn't go over and see Noah's place.
Yeah, that sucks, man. I think about that kind of stuff all the time. I always find excuses why not to do a thing.
Yeah.
And I always regret it. Whether it's something with somebody or whatever, like you're saying, and it's always been that way with me. I rarely get to do exactly what I want to do in life.
Yep.
So, first albino then. Now, when Joe got that in, where did the genetic stripe go?
He has told me like 7 times, but I can't remember. They both went to the same guy.
Well, would it have been Bob Clark?
I think it was Bob Clark. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you know how much Joe sold the first albino for?
It was pretty expensive. I want to say it was like 16 or 17 grand.
Okay, that's fair. And if I remember right, when Bob started selling albinos, they were, I think, $7,500 a piece, but I thought I heard they lasted for like 6 or 7 years at that price.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in 2004, so that was 92 when Joe did that. It was 2004. I bought an albino spider and I paid $14,000.
Yeah.
For a ready to breed adult.
Which is cool. That was a male?
Yeah.
At that point of the hobby, how far did you know you could take that male? Like, how many females did you know you could put him on a season?
Well, back then I thought maybe like 10. But that was pre-ultrasound, me not really palpating that much, me just kind of randomly breeding everything from December to March, kind of rotating him twice a week. I thought 10, but I realize now that that's way light.
Yeah.
Because with an ultrasound, you can stage your females. You're not wasting his time with a girl that's not ready to go. You can see her moving forward real quick, so you can take her out of a roster and put another one in her slot. I mean, now you can do, 30 to 40. If your male will eat while he's breeding.
I remember a gentleman named Mark out of Georgia. Might have been like Enterprise Reptiles. He got the bamboo early on, and same thing. He was kind of new to the
Yeah.
hobby, but he was taught how to use the ultrasound. And if I remember right, I think he was able to either breed it to 27 females in a season, or he got 27 clutches like right out the bat. And that would have
Yeah.
probably been like, I don't know, was that like 2008 or 9, maybe 10? Like, when did the bamboo hit the scene? You remember?
It had to be around then because one of my first orders from Noah in 2016, I ordered super bamboos, and he charged me 5,000 a piece for just about ready to breed girls, and that was 16.
Okay. Barchek, I think, started with like a super bamboo, but I don't think his super was a super bamboo. I want to say it was
So
a
that's the same thing that happened to me.
same thing
I
happened to
bought
you.
a
Okay,
I
fair.
bought a half a dozen animals. It took me, I think, about 2 years to breed them after I got them, or a season and a half. And they turned out to be lesser bamboos, Mojave bamboos. Yeah. So Noah got me in the end a little bit, but he never. Whenever I ordered an animal, I got an animal, and so far, historically, those are the only things I found to not be right genetically.
Okay. Um, was that the same? Okay, so like, stories like in the community early on, they talk about how like people in Africa started getting wise. They weren't just selling one of these animals; they'd breed them for a little while, get a bunch of them, and then act like they only had one. Is
Yeah.
that how it went with the champagne? Because I remember hearing a rumor about champagne, like 10 or 15 people thought they were the only ones buying it, but everybody was just buying them at the same time.
Yeah. That was champagne.
That was champagne.
Yeah.
And I think that was like probably like 17,000, maybe 17,500 for a thing like that back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. I was looking at the old John Barry book. I want to say it was maybe the one that came out in 2007, and there's a picture of a champagne in there, but it had a different name back then. Um,
Yeah, I can't remember because they were calling the green ones different, because there was some that are obviously green looking and other ones that are bright orange, and they were calling them different things, even though they're both the same.
yeah. Can I tell you about something pretty exciting I did this year for a pairing?
Sure.
I bred a desert hydra champagne to a couple hydras just because. The hydra champagne desert. Have you ever seen those in person?
Nope. Nope.
Fucking beautiful, man. They're like kind of light, but they got like this really nice like accents of yellow on the pattern with like a little lavender line that borders it really nice. Um, I don't really feel bad about making deserts. A lot of the stuff I'm doing, I just want to make really cool pets, man. And man, I always really like the desert stuff.
There is a whole bunch of people in the U.S. that want a ball python that don't want to breed, and if they have a desert, that's fine.
Yes, as long as they
You
know.
Now, is it ethical to try to breed a female desert when you know that the infundibulum is not going to unrelease from the egg and that she's going to be egg bound and die? You should say no, but if you breed a male and he's just making beautiful babies that you're selling as pets, I don't see how that harms anything.
No, I held back. Ben had a red exanthic desert too, and that was another really striking animal pattern, unlike anything I ever saw before. Now I ended up losing that animal. I just randomly, no idea why, and this was years ago. But that was another one I'd probably still be breeding today if I had it. I don't
Yeah.
know if I'll hold back anything extra this year, but this male I'm using, God, he must be 12. He's probably like 12 years old now, to be honest with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's just getting into his prime.
Yeah. Oh, he's got some good years ahead of him. I'm gonna not a
Yeah.
lot of work, but I'm gonna get some stuff out of him. I'll see how these babies look. I'll send you a picture. But like I said, I haven't done them in like I don't think I've done them in like 8 years. I think the year that Ben passed away, he had already done the pairings. I hatched out the babies, and then the whole desert thing just became such a stigma in the hobby that I just couldn't justify breeding them anymore, but I still kept them because I thought they were really cool looking animals. You got any deserts? Or we're on ball pythons now. Where are you at on balls at the moment? Completely out or just toned down?
Oh no. So last year in February, like the week they were supposed to start my chemo treatment, I went into the hospital for 17 days because my chemo port that they had put in failed. Then I got a MRSA infection, went septic. And also I was sick for about a week because I had to get an export. I did a show, then I had to get an export out. And I just had to get that all done before I went. So I had also had necrotic pneumonia and had rotted a hole in my lung. So I went to the hospital and they kept me for 17 days. They wanted to keep me longer, but I just had to get out and manage the business. And so about day 3, I was there. The hospital, my doctor, the main one that was overseeing the whole staff of specialists, they came in and told me to call my parents, have my parents fly from Maine to Florida because they weren't sure I was going to make it and that I should get my affairs in order. So I quickly didn't know what to do because right now I've only got, one main employee, a couple of part-timers that help me here and there. But I don't have any family or anybody else down here that could run the farm if I suddenly died. And my parents know nothing about my business because, they haven't come here to see it. I don't really talk about it much with my parents because, they're not snake people. So, so I quickly called around to a bunch of friends and said, hey, do you want to buy this? You want to buy that? So I sold my colubrid building. I sold my tortoise collection. I sold parts and pieces here and there, sold a vehicle. Just to have a money ball in case I died from my mother to pay my employee and kind of keep things running until you could find place for 2,200 animals to go. And so I quickly shed a bunch. And then through my chemo treatment in the summer, I kept selling off. And, I'm down to maybe 700 ball pythons now, which some people that seems like a lot. But to me, I just look out at like multiple empty buildings. My walk-in monitor pens are empty. My tortoise pens are empty, and I'm just like, man, I have a useless farm now. But I still have 1,000 animals, all species considered.
Yeah. So again, I'm really glad you came on the right side of things on this. And the animal thing, I always say it. Anytime you go back in or have to get rid of things in the hobby and have to rebuild again in the future, you always rebuild better. You're more selective.
Yep.
I don't know how crazy you're going to try to get with it. And, your comment on 700 to 1,000 animals in general, I was the same way. Like, and I was helping out the hockey guy. The collection just kept on growing. And now I have like 400, it's like 360 breeder ball pythons. And I tell people that and their eyes get all wide. And I'm like, man, it's so boring. It's such a small footprint. It's like, it's effortless. And I kind of miss the challenge of having way too many. The only time I hated it is when we produced a ton of babies and all my local rodent resources would all just dissolve overnight. We had the one year we overproduced, and I was driving to Texas 2 times a month to buy like 5,000 hoppers at a time just because that was the only place I could find to get hoppers.
Yeah.
And I want to say that was just post-COVID. So sucked. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that anymore, but yeah, man, it just doesn't feel like enough anymore.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, I lost my rat guy in October to the same cancer that I have. He suddenly had to stop so he could focus on his treatment. And Yeah, when you have this many animals and then you suddenly don't have a guy and you're trying to call around all the other people you know, but they can't fit you in. They might have 100 or 200 extra here or there, but they can't immediately fit you in and bump their other customers. It sucks when you get to drive 2 hours because you're going to pick up 100 smalls and 100 pups, and you're going to burn half a day and $100 in fuel just for 200 rodents.
Yep.
But you got to do it because the animals got to eat.
1,000%. I definitely am in a position now where I am producing about enough for what I need to do what I'm doing, but also there is a lot of there's not an even flow of rats that go into feeding. And I know you know the same thing. I say it all the time. We overfeed ball pythons, especially breeder ball pythons. I think, and we've talked about this, I want to say in between breeding cycles every year, I'm somewhere between 9 to 12 rats per female. But I'm doing very large meals, which I discussed with you. I do smaller meals after they lay, just something a little easier on their body. And then I usually there's a small fast, maybe about 30 days to 45 days. And then once a month, I start offering just a large rat. And most of the time they'll take it. And if they don't, they don't, and they might not eat until the following month. But they put the weight back on when they need to put the weight back on every year. And that, I don't know if it's rodent breeding propaganda that we got to feed an adult ball python a small rat or 2 small rats a week that just convinces us we need that. But when you get to be bigger, man, that's just not the way it is.
So one of the weird things that happened when I was at UF, I was a molecular genetics lab, and my professor originally came from UF from Harvard. And he was a limb development lab, working on, the gene processes that drive stem cells forward to differentiate into your thumb versus your pinky, why are your hands symmetrical to each other but asymmetrical to themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of hilarious that I work in a lab dealing with limbs, but my entire life outside of the lab is dealing with animals without limbs. But we soon had a couple of projects from students that wanted to do things outside of limb development. And we started looking at common gene sets and whatnot. And we ended up having, at the end of it, before I left, several reptile projects that used ball pythons. So as a research entity, I was getting gravid female balls in from Africa so we could have pure unmolested DNA. Because, the single digit 2000s to 2010 when I was at UF, I had tons and tons of normals at my place, but we had selected for very clean animals and no black tipping of the scales or things that were light or things at night when the animals are all glowed up look like ghosts. And that's a selection pressure. So for the research, we needed unmolested DNA. And so, I was getting in gravid ball pythons, in the spring, in February. It's amazing how deflated of a bike tire those things looked like after they laid eggs versus what our captive bred animals that are 4,000 grams look like after they lay eggs. Some of my animals, you take them off their eggs and you can't even tell they've laid versus these wild ones I was getting that, man, you could almost count every rib. But like you said, that it doesn't take a lot of meals for a ball python, because if you look at pythons, they have this very complex shrinkage of their stomach while they're not eating after the meal has cleared, and it goes to almost nothing. And then they eat this gigantic meal, sometimes half their body weight. And there's this sudden reconstruction of all the network and vascularization of the stomach to take on that giant food bolus and sit on it for a month and just wear it down and digest it. And So yeah, in February when I lost my rat guy, because for a decade I have fed every ball python a medium rat every week. I suddenly couldn't get anything, so I started. I skipped a few weeks, and then I really started looking around, and the only thing I could come up with was the never-ending supply of jumbos when the mouse guys flip their colony, or the rat guys flip their colonies, and they can't get rid of all the jumbos. So I experimented with a bunch of stuff here, and I fed all the way down to a 1,600-gram ball python, a rat that was 420 grams. And, it's funny when you have a ball python that's only, she should have been 2,200 grams, but she laid eggs. Now she's 1,600 grams. It only takes like 3 of those jumbos, and she looks like she never lost a gram.
No, I always say, like, after I feed one of these, I don't even know the weight of the rat. I should probably check it, but one of these larger size rats, the female can't even really curl up for a couple days. Like, her body's more elongated. I mean, it looks bad. It looks like an ovulation that's gone wrong. And then the gases, the rat pops, and it's a lot easier. It looks a lot better. I understand why people wouldn't want to go that way, but also I don't see why more people aren't doing it that way.
Yeah. I think it's just easier. A lot of people just, feed what their guy offers them, and, they get a medium once a week, and it leaves a small bump, and it's not that violent. It's not, surprising, and then you look at a lot of the information that you see on Facebook groups now. If you said, I'm going to feed my small adult ball python a jumbo rat, they would freak out. But if this snake is sitting in Africa and nothing has come in the termite mound or the log it's under for a month or 2 months, it's going to grab whatever comes by. Of
course. So when you worked with Bill Brand or Eugene, were they on more of a weekly feeding schedule, or was it more seasonal? Like, how did you guys manage feeding back then?
So at Eugene's, because he had so many different species, it was something was being fed every day. But for ball pythons and the boas and the berms, males got fed about half the rate of the girls. And it was girls didn't even get offered while they were gravid. After they laid eggs, it was 1 or 2 small meals. Then it was a couple giant meals. And, it was some species, it was weekly. A lot of species, it was every other week. And on the berms, if it was rats, it was every week. If we got in rabbits, it was, 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the size of a rabbit.
That's fair.
Like if they were 10-pound rabbits, it was, twice a month or once a month.
Yeah. Another thing too in the hobby, and I'm sure you've realized this over the years, but these large rats and jumbo rats, there's not a lot of guys that want them. So there's always a deal to be had when it comes time for you needing them, which is also another incentive if you want to have a bigger collection. Why creating a relationship where you're getting these larger rodents in might actually be more beneficial. And if you're anybody that has some size, you've probably figured this out by now if you're not already breeding your own rats and you have an unlimited supply or a really deep wallet.
Yeah. Yeah. Like this weekend, I was at Tampa at the Repticon with a booth, and I had 2 different people approach me that were rat guys trying to get rid of, 600 to 1,000 jumbo rats. And because they hadn't found anybody, one guy, he's been sitting on them for a year. And if nobody wanted them, he was just going to donate them to the gator farm.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. I've got a lot of $1 rats I've bought over the years.
Yeah.
Various sizes, but like
and $1 for a jumbo rat's pretty cheap per gram.
Yeah.
When I had a bigger monitor collection here, I was just taking all those frozen jumbos and cutting them into 2-inch discs on the table saw and had little rat discs from all the monitors.
Oh, I don't hate that. I could probably handle that. I just don't think I'd like that, but I could probably handle it.
Well, the first day I decided to try it, I was surprised at how well a hard frozen rat cut on a table saw. So I did, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 28-quart trays. And that's when I realized that I was getting all the spatter on my chest and belly. So I had kind of a mat of some rat goo and hair. And I only realized it because my employee came to get me at the time. His name was Herb. And when he came into the shop and he flickered the lights, so I knew he was behind me. I turned around and he almost passed out because of it looked like, I guess, a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So I imagine the beard blocked the view of all the blood on you.
Yeah. That and my tits.
Ah, well, I'm more of a beard guy, not a tits guy. But speaking of ticks, that's the toughest thing. There's so many fucking ticks in the state of Missouri. I'm having to like grab my beard and look down at my body to pick them off me. And man,
Yeah.
I have pulled so many ticks out of me. I'm surprised I can still eat red meat. Like, I really think I've dodged a bullet, man.
Yeah. Now, what's funny is growing up in Maine, in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have a lot of ticks. I maybe found one on me in the whole 18 years of hunting and fishing. Then I went, the first time I ever went herping out of state, I went to Groton, Connecticut. And I found quite a few ticks there. It was my first kind of dealing with lots of them. And then coming to Florida, everybody told me they would be bad, but I haven't picked anything up. But what's unfortunate is when I bought my farm in 2015, I had a girlfriend at the time, and I was kind of buying this farm because it also has a 3-acre horse pasture, and she wanted to have some horses. And like the day after we looked at the property, she got out of the shower and she had the big red bullseye right on her chest. And I'm like, what's that? And she goes, oh, I had a tick. And I'm like, well, that's a bullseye. You got to go get checked for it. And yeah, it was a Lyme disease tick. But that's the only experience I've had with it. And that's the one tick she's got in her life.
So it would have been early to mid 90s when I was living in Wisconsin. My dad had a car dealership, and one of his mechanics was actually a herper, and he had Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Man, we have so many different kinds of ticks here too, but was it Lime Island off of like Connecticut or Rhode Island? You know the whole backstory on that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't gone down the rabbit hole. Like down here where I'm at, people believe the government are dropping ticks on purpose to, make us eat less red meat.
Yeah.
So I saw a clip of a documentary, and yeah, it was Lyme disease, Lyme Island off somewhere in New York, Connecticut area.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I watched somebody talk about that for an hour. And then at the end, he talked about how Lyme disease had been around for hundreds of years. I think one of those frozen bodies they found up in the Alp that had been there for God knows how long tested positive for Lyme disease or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Some old mummified dude. But yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'll be sadder if I couldn't eat red meat or if I couldn't eat gummy bears anymore.
Yeah,
I did the vegetarian thing. I could be a vegetarian again.
I don't want to be a vegetarian, but my main source of protein is fast food while I'm on the road to and from or at shows, and I don't think that meets beef, so it probably wouldn't affect me much.
It's something.
Yeah,
it's no worse than a hot dog, and I love hot dogs.
Yeah, I mean, once it gets made into pink slime, is the Lyme disease going to live through all that chemical processing? Probably not.
Well, I guess it's comforting. I could still eat a Big Mac after getting this tick disease.
Yeah.
Still rough. Still rough.
And I eat a ton of fish, so I mean, I can eat a lot of fried fish.
That's good. I've never been a big fish guy. I don't know why. I like monkfish and salmon and a couple things, but like I've never really been a big fish eater.
As much as you go fishing, or I see pictures of you fishing.
Man, it's I. You know what it is. You know what stops me from eating fish? Cleaning a fish. I remember I was like 18 or 19, but I was on the Mississippi River with my grandpa, and we were on this dock fishing all day. And we had a few bass, a couple walleye, a northern pike, a catfish, and he was selling card readers for businesses. And there was a Chinese restaurant he was trying to close on. So he told me to clean all this fish because he wanted to deliver the fish to this guy on the way back to close the deal. And he comes down and I'm gutting these fish and like I'm just in bad shape. My eyes are watering. I look really uncomfortable. I'm gagging. And the way grandpas are supposed to be, he came down and he looked at me and he's all like, I thought you could handle this. And I've never been the same since. I do know where he was coming from, but like, man, it's the cleaning of a fish that makes me just never want to eat a fish. Like,
Yeah.
but I love letting them go. It's actually kind of a sad story. It's a fish story. I'm going to tell you a fish story. So I caught my biggest walleye ever about a month and a half ago. 24 inches plus easily. Got in this river in like 4 feet of water, just in the canoe. I go down some fast water after I just get it in the boat. That was, I get to the bottom and I take this thing out and I'm so concerned about it living, I start reviving it in the water. My buddy's taking a piss and he comes back over when it's time to finally take a picture. The thing just thrusts out of my hand, and I just watch it swim away for about 20 feet in crystal clear water, just completely stunned. I couldn't get my picture, and it is now forever a fish story. But
my first rainbow trout, I wanted a picture of so bad, but the guy with me just was busy trying to sight cast a fish he could see, and so I kept this fish in the shallow, where it couldn't get away from me, but it could still be in the water. And, finally, by the time he got over to take a picture, it was dead. And I didn't want to keep it. I wanted to let it go. So, so I had this fish died just because I wanted a picture. But, so in solidarity, I ate it for dinner.
Well, you had to at that point. If
Yeah,
you're gonna accidentally kill it.
Yeah.
But no, even growing up in Wisconsin, man, like I did a lot in upstate Wisconsin for fishing. When I lived in New York, man, when you got your fishing license in New York, it was all like, you're allowed to eat a quarter of a bass every 4 months. Like, just too many rules, man. Just really sketchy.
Yeah.
But, man, I will say one of my favorite things I ever ate, and then we'll get back to reptiles, was I caught a brook trout in the Adirondacks. And I remember just gutting that thing, sticking a stick through its mouth, no seasoning, over the fire, grabbed it by the head, but like the meat just fell right off the fish, and it was delicious. If I catch another brook trout, I'll keep a brook trout. But other than that, man, just don't have the drive to keep fish like some people do, man. I'm a catch and release guy.
Yeah.
But so I hit you up about a month ago after that T positive, or what looks to be a T positive crested gecko was produced.
Yeah.
I
From
feel
Nicole
really bad.
Cullen.
What was the breeder's name again?
Nicole Cullen.
Nicole Cullen. And I think she had another project. I think it was called like Sockfoot or something like that.
I remember what she ended up calling it, but yeah, that was one that it popped up while at Gourmet Rodent, when they were starting to, dwindle down and cease. And so she bought it, because she was at the time the COO, and general manager. So, it was sold off to her.
It's pretty cool. So How many mutations do you think slipped through the cracks in that company just with the mass production they had going on for so long?
Lots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and or there's also lots of things that they looked weird there, and then they popped up elsewhere, and you're like, hey, that probably came from here 5 years ago.
I get that.
So yeah, because I mean, you just think, um, leopard geckos, they had 18,000 breeder leopard geckos. Ball pythons, 4,000 female breeders on the line. Uh, you know, uh, Colubrids, at one point, probably pushing 10,000 breeder colubrids. So, yeah, so there was lots of things too that popped up and then disappeared, only to reappear elsewhere a year later.
Interesting.
So there was many things stolen.
So, which happens, man. I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean, because at their biggest point, they had 83 employees. So,
no. I got to do a tour of that place. Bill Brandt was nice enough to walk me through, and man, I really enjoyed the scale of things. I enjoyed some of the old tubs you guys were still using in rack systems.
yeah,
Top to bottom, like I said, it was just a cool experience to just see like so many working parts at a large scale. I think the only other company I ever saw that was that big would have been Barchek when he was really peaking. Like everything was just really awesome. Um, Going to a place like that made me want to manage a large collection until I actually had an opportunity to manage a large collection.
yeah.
Um, I didn't so much mind the work, but I think anytime there's a partner in anything and things are out of your control, when you start getting to bigger scale, makes it really hard to enjoy it sometimes, but you got to keep on trucking along.
Yeah, and I think that's what happens with a lot of the reptile community now. We all start this hobby as a hobby, and we like it, and we like the animals. We love the animals. And then, we decide, hey, we want to breed stuff just because we want to breed it. We want to make more. We want to see the offspring of the animal that originally we drew us to getting that animal. And then, there's people that decide, well, if it's going to cost me this much money and I can't afford it, I have to breed to sell the offspring to afford the hobby. And that's where you get these people that start doing shows or start doing morph market that then they either aren't good business people or they continue to make decisions based on hobby instead of business. And then you see them burn out and sometimes melt down on Facebook a year or two later, 3 years later, 4 years later, once they've gotten to the room of animals in the house. It's a $500 a week food bill, which if they have a downturn at their day job is really hard to cover. And then they just burn out because they were built for the hobby, not for the business. And then you see some guys that thrive in the business and are able to amass these giant collections because when something is a failure to thrive or something brand new disappears, they don't freak out because they just keep pushing forward with the business. Or like, in Eugene's case, Eugene, when I first met him, had gaboon vipers and lots of berms, but he realized that wasn't going to be householdable. And so he completely switched, and now he's primarily corn snakes and ball pythons, and there's nothing bigger than a Colombian rainbow. When I met him 25 years ago, it was, if it isn't a Burmese, it's a girl's animal.
Fair. Old school mentality.
Yeah.
Is there anything you guys ever noticed with corn snakes that could actually get them to produce more eggs a year, as in clutch size over multi clutches?
Just the fecundity, which is the propensity for production, was hugely genetic. So, and Bill figured that out 25 years ago, or 30 years ago. And so we would only keep holdbacks from animals that had an 18 to 20 egg first clutch and above a 16 egg second clutch. So if that girl's not making 36 or 38 eggs, we're not keeping any of her offspring.
So one reason I ask about that is, so I got a bunch of double and triple palmetto females, and it was something I just happened to come. Dude wholesaled me a bunch of babies for $20 a piece. Was done with them. I decided to raise a bunch up. I probably have like 14 or 15 breeders, but the 2 seasons prior to this, I was getting like 8 or 9 egg clutches. And this year, all my palmetto girls gave me like 15 to 20 eggs a piece. And a first-time breeder palmetto female that honestly was a little on the smaller side, in my opinion, gave me like 16 eggs. Now, was there something I did differently this year? Was it just my feeding habits, or was it just the stars aligned?
No, I think with corns, it's how good of food they were fed before they went into hibernation or brumation.
All right. So is follicles not determined before that? Like how many follicles they can develop?
I've never looked before putting with an ultrasound before putting a female down.
All right. Did you ever notice with your boas before they would reabsorb? If you ever got to look at them in the ultrasound, you could see the next set of follicles almost dropping down in between the top.
Yeah,
so that's why I assume it's predetermined.
Yeah, and if you look at corn snakes too, I think there's a locality proponent, because if you look at a Miami corn, its structure is very different than an Okatee corn. You know, you're not going to find a 6-foot Miami that's 2.5 inches, 3 inches in diameter. You know, now you don't see many Okatees that big anymore, but they used to be that big. And I think it's, you know, you look at, I think that also affects baby size, hatching weight, and whether the animal wants to eat a pinky or wants to eat a lizard. And we have mixed up those genes so much, making all the morphs, that I think you'll get some familial throwback. So, you know, really just doing selection, you know, lineage selection and fecundity selection, parentage selection is what we can do the best to increase, you know, the egg clutch size, whether they double clutch every year or not, whether they want to skip or not, and how good they rebound before going into brumation.
So, you know, your Miami reference for the corns. Now, what I've been told in that community is that the Miamis have smaller eggs, and because of that, they have larger clutches. Is that true?
I wouldn't say larger clutches, because, you know, I have a lot of Okatees, or had, you know, before I sold my Colubri building, where you were getting 20, 22, and then a second clutch was 18 or 20. But I have seen some big clutches from Okatees, but, you know, I don't remember, or I mean, big clutches from Miamis, but I don't remember any 40 animal years from Miamis.
So, Jeff Sr., and I know you still chat with him, you can ask him about it, but I believe he had a season where one of his, I want to say it was a Miami face female, 3 clutches in a season, and I thought he either had 68 or 72 eggs from her. And that was the most he ever got out of a corn.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't argue, you know, with him, because he obviously knows what he's doing. But if she did a third clutch, that's very possible.
Yeah, I thought that was more egg size. Thought about them would just produce a little more eggs.
But I will agree that, yes, the egg size is smaller when you have a pure Miami.
So did that logic work with ball python breeding? Because when I used to, like, Limey used to talk about holding back his females that would come from 10 egg clutches. And in his mind, he would get bigger clutches. Do you find that being the case?
I think ball pythons, it's more age. Because if you look at today's colony, most people are getting rid of their breeders after, you know, 3, 4, 5 clutches on a girl, you know, and they're getting rid of males almost every year. So when I moved to Eugene's, in the single digit 2000s, that's one of the great things I learned from him. Gene, if a female produced well, he never got rid of her. He bred her until she died. So when I first started there, say 0203, he had animals 7707 and 7709, which meant it was born in 1977 and it was clutch 7, clutch 9. And those two girls were still actively breeding. And the bulk component of his breeders were from 88 to 95. So, he had the biggest collection of 20-year-old animals I've ever seen. And at that size, he was getting 10 to 15 eggs every single year without a female skipping. And she was usually laying within the same week as she laid the year before. And so, I think with ball pythons, I think real maturity is 7 or 8 years old. Even though we are able to breed these things, with the amount of food we're giving them at 18 months, I think that their real maturity, fertility and breeding wise is 7 or 8 years old. And that's when most people are getting rid of stuff now.
Let's get that. So I'll get some weights for you. I should have done it pre-lay and post-lay, but I had some females that were probably about 5 years old this year, maybe 6 years old before I bred them for the first time. I don't think they were at 1,000 grams yet. I think they were like 800 or 900 grams, and I still got 4 to 6 eggs from them. No problem, but it was just kind of like, I think it was animals when the collection was too big. We're getting a little more maintenance fed from babies for the first 3 or 4 years. Just kind of like het pied stuff, pieds, things like that we knew would go into production someday, but like we weren't trying to get it there too fast. And good clutches. I don't know where I was going with that. I almost feel ashamed I even said that. I was actually honestly very impressed that the animal handled it so well. She developed, so I bred her, and the clutch size was probably the biggest surprise for me.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the animals that I didn't make much on as an investment around, I would say 2011 or 2012, I bought on trade from Winston and Brock. I got a super pastel sugar shatter yellow belly something else. It was the coolest snake. It was 10 or 15 grand on trade. And I got it as like a 400 or 500 gram yearling. And I fed it, and it didn't want to eat. It only really wanted big mice. It would go, 2 months without eating. Then it would eat 3 times, and then 2 months without eating. And it was one of the prototypical, just small, don't want to eat, constantly stressed. Every time you opened the box, it, was all balled up. And I kept it, I don't know, 3-4 years, just trying to get it to 1,200 grams. Because that's when I used to start ultrasounding everybody. And finally one year, I'm just like, after, watching the value go down and all the lost years, I finally ultrasounded her. I think I had just moved here. It was the first year here. So it was the 2015 into 2016 season. I finally ultrasounded her, and she had 12 millimeter follicles. So time to breed. And then I weighed her, and she was 950 grams. And I'm like, well, you're obviously old enough, because at this point you're, 3-4 years old. You've got the follicles. So let's breed you and see what happens. And I bred her, and and I got 3 eggs, and one of them went bad, but I still got 2 babies. And, so I think, yeah, would I breed every 950 gram girl? No, but there are animals that are gonna, be outside the normal parameters.
No, and of course, being a boa guy and listening to guys like Vin talk about how age is more important than size, and like, it used to be 2.5 years old, 10 pounds, breed them. Now it's 6-7 years old, even 8 years old sometimes, 4 to 5 pounds, and now we're breeding them. I kind of had that same mindset going into it again when I measured these females that were maybe what would be considered on the smaller side, but had more than enough age. And like you said, were developing. So I just kind of saw it through. Um, I'm sure you could probably do that on a lot of different species.
Yep.
I know there's restrictions because of egg size, but a baby boa is big too. And even when you breed these girls smaller, the babies are still coming out big. Like you're not getting a smaller baby.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny when back in, I would say around '06 or '07, I bought Dennis Sargent's boa colony. Well, Jeff Ronnie got most of it, and I got a small portion of it. And he had Roatan Island boas. He had, and then true Amazon basin Brazilians. And his Roatan Island boas, keyword island, he had one that was 8.5 feet long and 40 pounds. The thing is big around my upper arm. And then his Surinams I was buying, or Brazilians I was buying, were, 10.5 feet, in the 65-pound range. And you don't even see boas that big anymore.
No. So when a dwarf boa is 8 feet long, at that point, do you even think it's a true dwarf anymore, or would you assume it was a mutt somewhere along the way, or can you just simply push these guys further because of unlimited food source?
I think a lot of these small localities are just long-term, environmental dwarfism from lack of food. And I think that you give certain animals all the food they want in captivity, and their genetics, allow them to grow.
It's fair.
And I mean, and that argument's happening in retics because a lot of people think that the dwarf retics really aren't dwarf. They're just insular localities that in the wild never get the food to get big. Now, are they, could you feed them and get them 10 foot, 12 foot, 14 foot? And is that considered a dwarf since, a Sulawesi will get 20 feet?
So, I was going to bring that up because that is a conversation I've heard had a lot in the hobby. I know people make jokes about it, but I think really, if we weren't so impatient and we knew just simply with a slower diet, we could have these species kept a lot smaller in captivity, I don't see why more people wouldn't be on board, because I think with a lot of retics, based on other species I've worked with where I've had success breeding them older and smaller, why couldn't you do that with berms and retics and other larger species?
Yeah, I think you can do it with all of them because, a lot of reptiles, and I'm talking more snakes than, say, amphibians or lizards, they fit a very flexible niche. They can go long times without food. They can go with environmental upheaval, and a lot of them are okay. Yeah, and I think you could bonsai a lot of species.
I like that. I'm gonna steal that sometime. That bonsai was that was solid.
Yeah.
I like that. So we're talking clutch sizes. You said you worked with a mirror. Do you remember that time when like coral goes and bananas were expensive?
Yes.
He posted a normal female on like 15 or 18 eggs. I think he said he bred a coral glow to it. And like the first comment was, "There goes the market." And the fact that people think one clutch could really ruin a market like that just shows people's lack of understanding of what this industry really is.
Well, because we kind of have three, I guess, mindsets in this industry. You have the mega producer who he's not going to buy anything expensive. He's just going to have 1,000 of the same thing because he's trying to supply Petco, PetSmart, Sun Pet, International, all this other stuff. You have the advanced investor who they want to buy whatever's the most expensive this year, get females sitting on eggs, sell off their investment to get most of their money back and then wait for what hatches. And then you have the hobbyist. And I think that sometimes the hobbyist doesn't understand the investor, and the investor really doesn't care what anybody else thinks, and neither does the mega producer. And I was at the show, I think it was Daytona 2014, where female bananas came in at a crazy price on Friday, $14,000 or $15,000, because you had to have a female to make a super. And then by Sunday, all the people that were willing to pay that had paid that, and so they had dropped to $4,000. So they had a $10,000 drop over 72 hours, but it was because it was assumed that all the buyers that would buy at the higher price had bought out, or it's one guy's desperate to get some money back, so he drops it 1,000, the next guy drops it 1,000, the third guy drops it 1,000, blah 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 blah, because they didn't have enough assets to keep the price high, or they were afraid of being the guy left holding the bag.
So one thing I remember a lot back then that I see a lot less of now, but pretty much if you're a guy investing in banana and you're at $14,000 and you see this guy next to you at the show at $4,000, a lot of times back in the day, you would just buy that guy out before the show even started to keep your market high.
Yes.
I don't see people protecting their market that way anymore when they see prices around them dropping like they are.
Yeah, and I think some of it is that we have gotten a lot of hobbyists that are commingled, trying to climb up the ladder, and are halfway between hobbyist and investor. And the other fact is that it was easier to do when we had 10, 50, 10, 25, or 50 morphs versus now that there's 7,000 flavors.
Yeah. I agree with that. So I was talking about like just the progression of ball pythons, even the last 10 years, on what's considered, I guess, like the new trend or investable. And, a decade ago when everyone was buying every clown female up on Friday at Tinley and the same thing at Daytona, I didn't see longevity in that, but I guess I couldn't see what the potential was with the clown. Now I'm getting a little more drained on clown. It's been a little over a decade now. I've mentally tried to move on, but
Yeah.
man, how the shit? I had to talk about clown so long I completely forgot the reason of this conversation. Oh, now I remember. I guess what I find kind of funny is, I remember the clown thing, which is still the thing. That's not going to change. And then, the market became more challenged where it became more of a double recessive game, triple recessive game. And then it was throw your enhancer genes in there. So special became the enhancer in your clown. And right now, and you know this too, because you're in one of these projects, we're in the granite movement in the projects. Like granite is so hot right now, and like all granite projects. And the thing that I find the most wild about the granite projects blowing up right now is I've seen so many granites coming through Outback over the last 20 years. What the fuck took so long for these things to all start proving out at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the market gets easily distracted by what's new, bright, and shiny. And for the longest time, we had big game changer genes like, clown and banana and all this stuff that just overshadowed everything else. And then, there was a lot of guys like Kabolka, Bob Vu that started putting out the 4 or 5 gene animal with a lot of cheap genes, maybe one of the new nice genes, expensive, and a couple of enhancers that we all forgot about. And we're all like, what the hell is that thing? And, and so we all spent a lot of time buying into those things, Batman or whatever, Pompeii's. And, yeah. And so, but, the whole time, all of these granites, coming and going, and One of the coolest things I did at Gourmet from 2013 to 2018, I got to open every single bag of ball pythons as the area manager. And I got to, touch them, sniff them, see them, all of them. And I would set back anything that I thought is a special. And when you get to look through 18 to 22,000 ball pythons in one go, it, at various times through the night, you'll be like, nothing, 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 nothing. And then the next 300, you think everything are special, and you keep riding that roller coaster. But yeah, I mean, every year I picked out 100 granite things that were like heavy, heavy, heavy granite sides and solid black backs and, weird copper colors. And like, this has to be something, and then it would eventually get cast to the wind to Petco.
Yeah. So, I talk about it, and we talked about like Hurricane Trick and Blitz earlier, but when Dan Wolf got out of the game and the trick market just pretty much went to shit and really never recovered after that, it really took a $7,500 trick hitting the market a decade later, and then put into projects where I actually like what that gene does with some of the clown stuff. Like when Justin was showing off his Pompeii breeder next to his new Pompeii Hurricane breeder, like not only did it look better color wise, the colors more vibrant, but the pattern looked a little bit cooler. And honestly, if Trick was not $7,500, we would not have had a Trick Pompeii today or Hurricane Pompeii. So that kind of helped the project out. And same thing with the granites right now. I think these expensive granites that are doing things that, in my opinion, are very unique and subtleties that aren't overpowering. Like, we're going to start seeing a lot more granite put into stuff for at least the next 2 or 3 years, because that's the attention span at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that wasn't even like a question. That was just you listening to me talk, and I appreciate you.
Yeah, I mean, my Granite Morph Mega, I've been sending to Japan since 24 because nobody really cared about it here. I think Kabulka's Cosmos, being a granite type or pattern rearranger, that brought a lot of the focus and interest to that. But yeah, and I mean, I think people are just looking for something different. Because even though there are a lot of new things, Cosmos, Desert Ghost is kind of winding down. But, and then is Sunset really going to be able to be modified so it doesn't turn brown? Monsoon is now, getting affordable to the regular people. But there's not a lot of new stuff on the market, maybe Tornado, but yeah, so I think people are just, the investment side is looking for something new.
Well, you talk about 7,000 different options for ball pythons. Even if we just talk base genes, you might know this more than me, but how many base genes do you think we have in ball pythons right now?
I thought I saw 300 somewhere, but I don't know why I think I did or where I saw it. But I think somebody said we had 300 from the wild. But now it's not a lot of stuff coming from the wild. It's now stuff that's popping up in colonies, or I found a weird one at a pet store, or one got traded into me, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you are right about that. So I'm trying to think what the moral of this story is right now. Well, actually, I think what I was just going to get at was, when you look at the ball python market right now, it's kind of like 20 genes all being swapped back and forth and mixed together right now, and that's really what this market is. And there's 280 other ones out there. Like, I'm putting time into like Quake right now. I got some Quake
What?
Clowns hatching out right now. I've got some black lace laying around. I got a couple lace shatter females from a buddy of mine that are breeders, and the shatter gene. Man, I always really loved the shatter gene, and then it just
Yeah,
disappeared, and then the shatters made look like shit moving forward.
yeah.
What happened to Shatter? You think Shatter's going to come back, or do you think Shatter's over?
I don't know. I think that since when you breed shatter, you never know if you're going to have good expression, poor expression, and where is that expression on the body, and is it going to make the snake more attractive? Because I would say a good 50% of the shatters I ever made, the gray spot was on the belly, and then nobody ever saw it, so it didn't matter. Probably the coolest one I ever got, I sold to Tracy Barker. I got one out of a bag of imports, and it had, its chin was all gray, had a gray stripe down the belly, and it looked really cool. But because it reminded me of like the Moko tattoos on Maoris, where they have their chin tattooed. But I don't know whatever happened to that snake. It was probably 15 years ago I sold it to her or more.
Yeah, I remember just Googling different shatter combos back in the day that were just super high expression. A lot of them were Mojave combos.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about it. Probably not, but when I got that late shatter female stuff in, I immediately plan on going paint with it. I
Yeah.
just figured anything that's going to really influence the lower half of the body will probably do something unique to paint. And maybe some reason it actually creates more paradox spotting on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to be curious and make combinations because we might have an idea of what it's going to do, but we really don't know what it's going to do until we do it. Because just take Mojave for instance. Who knew that breeding two brown snakes with gold accents would make a purple-headed white animal? So, or the same thing. Like when I went to Gourmet, I started there just as the transition from Bill Brand owning it to Mike Lehman owning it. And Bill had got in this original animal that they called Mackenzie because of the name of the employee that worked that room and picked it out of the bag. And they thought it was just going to be a fire. Well, they bred it to a fire and it didn't make a white black-eyed Lucy. So then they assumed it was a vanilla and they bred it to a vanilla and they didn't make a super vanilla. So then they finally, by that point, they had grown some up and was able to breed it to itself, assuming it would make some sort of white combo. And it did not, and then the project got shelved because Mike didn't really see it. He didn't think it was that big of a thing. And then they sold me some. And then finally, a few years later, I make Super Mackenzie jigsaws, and we end up with a battleship gray animal with darker gray teardrops. And Winston took it to Tinley, and it got a good showing and got on the face of Reptile Report, and suddenly it was a thing where it had lay fallow for a decade because nobody figured out the right combo to do with it.
Yeah, so
I think we need to be I think we need to be curious instead of just breeding the recipes we know, because you're going to find the recipe nobody else figured out. There's still a lot of recipes, tens of thousands of recipes to be made, and some of them are going to be really freaking cool.
No, we're always going to stumble upon the next good idea that we will all hold on to for 5 years plus, and a really good idea a decade. And I couldn't even really guess what the look we'll be chasing in 10 years will even be in ball pythons, because that market changes so frequently.
Yeah.
And, as long as there's always somebody that's creating the popularity and the buzz behind these ideas, there will always be a new high-end project everyone's going to chase. as long as again we have good representation. And right now, ball pythons, like there are more people treating ball pythons as a true business now than I've ever seen in the hobby. Whether it's their social media stuff, even their video content. Like time was put in back in the day. Don't get me wrong, but the way these guys have adapted to everything, like everything's just so much better in ball pythons right now. I feel.
I think yes, I think we have grown. Facebook, internet, and all the print companies have really made it easy to be a cool little business. You can get a banner and a name and some stickers and all set up in a weekend. Whereas in the 80s and 90s, you had to, there was barely any shows, and there, prior to Craigslist, you had to go out and just hustle different cities and find the pet shops, and you got a mailing list. And, when I started this for the first 4 or 5 years, you had to send a self-addressed stamped envelope with sometimes $1, sometimes $2.95 or whatever to get somebody's price list. And I remember, man, one of my first ones I ever asked for was, I think, from South Mountain, and they literally sent me 3x5 photos of all the animals, all their breeder animals, and you just, wrote them back what you wanted babies from. Yeah. And, so sometimes it took a month to do a deal because you had to, send them a letter, and then you get a letter back, then you send them a letter, and then you might get a phone number to get a phone call. Yeah, now a deal can be done in 30 seconds.
Yeah. So I don't mess with TikTok, but I keep on getting reminded by people in the hobby that use TikTok, just like how well they do on there with reptile stuff, whether it's selling. Yeah. I don't know if I'm ever going to TikTok, man. I probably should because it sounds like easy money, but man, that just doesn't seem like it's right for me.
Yeah, me neither. I stopped selling on King Snake in what was single digits. Then then in Herp auction back then. I stopped selling on Morph Market in 2017. I still have an account, but I've never done anything with my store or my profile. Really, I just rely on my regular, order customers, and then, all my byproduct and extra stuff just goes to, shows, and I do 40 shows a year. Now, I have joked that what I put into show tables, fuel, and hotels, I could easily pay a sales guy to sit here and do it, and probably he would make more sales on the internet than I would make at a show, and the commission would be cheaper than what I pay for gas tables and hotel. But I just haven't. I'm not the guy to get out there and try to find somebody because I'm just too busy doing my snake stuff.
Yeah,
and it's that old adage of, do you work in your business or on your business? And you got to make. And I've just never done the jump to work on the business. I'm stuck working in it.
I I like working in it.
Yep, and that's why most of us do, because we're animal people.
Yeah, and I like the grind on the road until my car gets in bad shape, and then I hate everything about being on the road. But like, I've always had a way behind the table that I just, I do well with people face to face. I feel like I'm very thorough. I'm saying not too much, but just enough to make sure they're going to be successful with what they're buying in that moment.
Yeah.
I find too much talk is no good sometimes. I think sometimes you could talk your way out of a sale. Sometimes you got to be a little more precise. I always say you got to know if you're talking to a future breeder or a pet owner. It's a very different conversation. Like these are things you learn face to face at a show, though, that the whole online thing, I get it, and I'll always sell stuff online. But man, I can accomplish so much in a show on a weekend. Like it's hard to give them up.
Yep.
But I noticed something, and you may have noticed it too. But the last like 6 months, the cities that I've been going to with really great economies and really strong middle class are not really buying a lot of reptiles. But then I'm going to these little poverty enriched, like little 20,000 people towns, and I'm making significantly more money.
Yep.
Um, and I think that takes me back to when I got on the hobby, like, working an $8 or $9 an hour job, saving like $40 or $50 on every paycheck to go to the Cleveland show to spend 180 on something kind of deal. You know, poor people don't think twice, man. Especially if they want something, they're gonna get it. And I think I made 2 times the amount of money in like Farmington, Missouri at a 1 day show than I did in 2 days in Scottsdale, Arizona, which was a 19-hour ride.
Yep.
It makes it, I used to chase cities with strong economies. I'm not sure that's what I'm going to focus on for the time being. I think I'm
No,
going to go
I
the opposite.
100% agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's because when you're middle class and you have extra money, you're thinking about investments. You maybe have more property that requires maintenance costs, cars, boats, your houses. And when you're lower class or poor or, lower income, you don't have that stuff. And you spend more time in your home and you spend less time out doing things. And when you're in your home, you like pets and you want things around. Um and I mean the demographic of what buys reptiles has changed. I mean, when I started selling reptiles in the 90s, it was very much the tattooed biker crowd, punk kid, you know, uh, jock, young male, 20-year-old. And now I see a lot more. It's still young people, but it's much less the tattooed biker crowd and more just the young crowd. And in young people, they tend to live in those demographics where they're working a minimum wage to maybe $4 or $5 over a minimum wage job, and they're not buying houses and they're not buying cars that are 100 grand. They're buying pets.
Yeah.
And they have tons of stuff. They have reptiles, they have fish, they have birds, they have dogs, they have cats, they have everything, pets.
Yeah. And
Because you don't meet a person that has one snake for 20 years and that's it. That person is very rare. Our customer has 19 animals of everything all at once.
yep. I, when I first got in the hobby, I bought two of everything I could buy, every species. Like I went nuts. And too, like, there's a reality. Like, I wasn't going to go to school. I thought I was always going to be a factory working kind of guy. I knew I loved the idea of sales, but just didn't really have that. Like, you know, sales is something that really comes natural. I know you could teach sales, but like, you know, you can't always teach sales. Like, it's a natural thing. But I always had the dream of this being a full time job while going to my $8 an hour job for years. And I hate to say it, it doesn't always work out. And it was a decade of like failing more than anything before it finally really started working itself out. But I'm happy I stuck it out, man. But there was multiple times in that first like 10 years that I probably should have hung up the towel. But the
Yeah.
dream's always there, even for the little guy, man, even the lower class guy. I will say I'm still low class. I live in a shed, but man, do I have a really nice reptile collection.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a trailer with 17 buildings on my property, and mine isn't the best building.
Yeah. Why would it be, man? You don't need the best conditions.
No. No, I can thermoregulate myself and I can wander around and find food. Nothing contains me.
Fair.
But yeah, I mean, when I left UF in 2010, I left partially because one, I was just tired of teaching grad students, because we were a very competitive lab. So the kids coming in, were had been told they were special their whole lives. And I, being the metalhead over in the corner with tattoos and snakes, didn't really blend. So as time went on, I got more and more tired of the kids. Then I also, at the same time, I did not understand how important continuing education was, because 10 years after getting my degree, which was in animal science, the field of molecular genetics had changed so greatly that it wasn't even recognizable. And so every year, my grad students coming in got a little bit smarter and I got a little bit dumber. And then I happened to see a printout in the office printer of everybody's salary up through my, professor I worked for. And I realized I was making more with my hobby than my professor was making, being a tenured professor that was a pretty big hotshot coming out of Harvard, with a ton of grant money. And I'm making more than him with my hobby. And so I came home and, maybe it was easy for me because it was in the golden years of ball pythons. I made a ton of money for the effort. And I didn't need schooling for any of it. I just needed to show up every day and, using Matt Armstrong's quote, hard work beats talent any day. I just had to get up and clean cages and get up and feed and set eggs and then sell the animals. And you can do that without any formal education. So it's a real way to make good money. And I've had lean years. I've had years where production didn't work. I've had years where, I felt like I gave my employees most of the money instead of putting it in my pocket. But I will say, last year, when I almost died in February, I was back in the hospital in June, and I had chemo from February to October, where I had 125 doctor's appointments in 1 year. I could not have done that had it not been for this business. I couldn't be working at somebody else's company or sitting at a desk at UF trying to teach students and go through that. I would have lost whatever normie job I had. Reptiles allowed me to do that because they're so flexible. And, I just, so I'm super grateful to Reptiles, even though, nothing is guaranteed. And it's definitely farming, because most of these animals, we only get 1 or 2 productions out of a year. And nothing's guaranteed until the animal is sold. But I couldn't have survived last year with a regular job.
You know, um, I'm gonna be a lifer. I know you're a lifer in this hobby, and where there is some negative sometime, like even luckily enough, I had people around me when I was doing what I was doing years ago. That when my dad got sick down in Florida, I got to go down there when it was important, and I was able to
Yeah.
walk away a little bit. I had people again I could rely on. If I had a normal 9 to 5, I would have never had that opportunity. And there's a lot of other opportunities I've had because of this hobby. Um, I don't know. Like I said, not everyone's gonna be built for it. If you got some good people around you that are at least trying to steer you in the right direction, you'll have a better chance of being successful. But sometimes it's just the person, man. You're built a certain way, and I've seen you at the shows, like, this whole lifestyle, what you got to do, the cars you got to sleep in sometime. Like, we make a lot of sacrifices to do this, but it's easy work once you get it dialed in.
Yep. Oh yeah, I gave up a guaranteed retirement. I gave up another business I could have done. I gave up multiple relationships, just because the farm comes first. The animals have to come first, and yeah, I'm on the road 4 days a week. 40 weeks of the year, I leave on Friday and I get back Monday.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to cut it down to 24 a year, but I'm sure that 24 is gonna be 34 just because that's the way it is sometimes. And
Yeah.
it's really like I said, I feel like things are out of my control when I sit at home staring at the computer waiting for an email to come in. At least when I've got people walking by my table looking at my animals, I just feel like there's always a chance. I have more control over what's going on around me.
Yeah. I
But
make most of my money. I make at least every show 50% selling to other vendors. And a lot of them are friends. A lot of them, I see only at shows because, if I didn't see them at a show, I wouldn't travel to their farm or their facility, and maybe, 2 or 3 a year, but I couldn't see all of my friends if I didn't go to these shows. And then the other thing is, the Reptile family have helped me out when I've, totaled vehicles. They've helped me out when I need sudden cash injections. They've helped me out when, I've had problems and I'm stranded. And, those are things that I could have never called any of my university colleagues and said, hey, I'm in, so and so, and my van's broke down. You want to drive 7 hours and get me and get the animals, or at least get the animals so I can stay with the van. And you know that camaraderie only comes from a type of industry like this. It doesn't come from a day job.
no, I agree, and I'm always curious how other industries are. Like I've always wanted to go to just a completely different industry and go to their after party and see what their community's like. And I just don't think there's many communities like the reptile community. Um,
No,
so,
no,
but
I saw a little bit of it in the horse industry because I grew up on a horse farm. Uh, Several hundred pounds ago, I used to compete horses in three-phase eventing, and there was a little bit of that there. But I mean, it was way more cutthroat, friendly to your face and stab you in the back than the reptile community is.
yeah, well, I don't mind the stabbing behind my back as long as I don't find out about it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
anybody who can keep a good secret in the industry is good. But how about this, man? I don't want to keep you too much longer. I wanted to squeeze at least 2 hours out of you.
Yeah. Yeah, my
I was
red foot tortoise delivery guy is called twice.
Oh, well, you could have said something, man. There was priority tonight. I told you to tell me.
Well,
All
he was supposed to show up at 11 and he's not here yet. So,
right. Well, hopefully it's
so
more
you definitely
clarity.
weren't keeping me because, I'm all hours. And when somebody's traveling through and, they need to stop by, I'm open 24 hours a day.
Well, I will keep that in mind. I got to start taking more trips down to Florida, but
Yeah, I got a spare bedroom now if you need to stop.
I'll take advantage of that, man. Honestly.
Yeah.
Well, how about this?
There's only 2 monitors in it right now and they're babies, so they don't take up much space in the room.
I can live with that. I think I can live with that. But yeah, man. I say this every time, but if we don't get to do another one of these, I know I'm going to see you at a show soon, and we'll get talking. But
Yeah.
next time we have a chance of doing this, if you're interested, maybe we pull Joe out of the woodwork and have some old conversations.
Yep.
Like I said, I always enjoy the stories, man. But
Joe has crazy stories, shipping 12 and 13-foot crocodiles and,
yeah,
you know, getting stuff out of Africa and all the days of selling parrot beak tortoises and, spectacle came in for $25 to college kids. And, back when it truly was the Wild West.
I like that.
But yet
Last
somehow
thing,
not everybody died.
somehow, man. Well, we're built different, man. Generationally, too, built different. But last thing, so I found an old price list from the '90s, and the only thing on there that was actually more money then than it was now, consistently it seems, ball pythons, man. I think there
Yep.
were like $65 on that sheet back in the '90s. When now what, 35, $40? But
Yep.
consistent, man. 30 years, fucking consistent.
Yep.
But all right, well, like I said, I appreciate you, Ben. You need anything, you know where to get me. I'll talk to you soon, bud.
Okay.
All right, later,
That's
man.
it.
Okay, everybody. Thank you as always. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, see you next time.